Hello and welcome to another episode of Fintech Focus TV with me, Toby. Today, utterly delighted to be joined by Ben Brabyn. Ben, how are you?
I'm very well, Toby. Thank you very much.
Listen, lovely to have you on the show. This is another one of our special series entitled The Interview. We're talking to senior people from across the industry who are looking for the next opportunity at the moment and sort of shedding some of the light on some of the great talent I think that's out there at the moment. Ben, you are certainly one of those. A stellar background from in all sorts of different areas, and probably most recently and really interestingly, you were the head of Level 39. Tell us a little bit about Level 39. Tell us a little bit about your background and the story so far that's been such a great story to tell.
Fantastic. Well, Toby, thanks very much. So you're right. I've spent the last 4 years at Level 39, which is a cluster of about 200 fintech and cybersecurity companies in Canary Wharf in East London. And it's a subsidiary of Canary Wharf Group, the property company that has built most of Canary Wharf. But it's really also an amenity, not only for small, early stage, high growth, mainly B2B fintech companies, but of course also the other significantly bigger tenants of Canary Wharf, the major financial institutions. And so it's a fantastic environment to bring together large and small organizations, challenger and incumbent, those that are focused on product and those that are focused on service. You find, in other words, you're right at the interface between so many of the critical issues in fintech and financial services innovation. It's been a fantastic environment to be in, and I'd heartily recommend, if you're not already involved with Level 39, that you take a look.
It is an amazing place, and I've been lucky enough to be over there a few times, and I think the sort of and we'll come on to this. We'll talk about communities and ecosystems, but I think it's so, the lounge and everything about that place is very cool, and we're seeing some incredible success stories, which I'm sure we'll sort of cover, that have come out of it as well. Talk to us about the journey before that as well, because you ended up there for the last 4 years and did a great job there too. But take us back a little bit further. Talk us through the story of your career to date.
So my story begins. I grew up on a farm, and then I got a degree in philosophy. And then I spent the first few years of my career as a Royal Marine. So certainly not a typical route into tech or fintech.
Surprisingly, it's fairly common though, as well, isn't it?
Say again?
Surprisingly, it's fairly common though, as well, isn't it? I think that sort of high performance environment that you're created from there allows you to sort of, so many lessons. I'm fascinated by military history. I'm fascinated by the sort of performance of the forces, and I think it's a great starting point to allow great things to happen for later on. But carry on. I cut across you from a point of interest there.
I'm going to agree with you enthusiastically, and I would say also, if you're in a position to invest in or hire a veteran, I'd heartily recommend you do so. I think that military experience gives people both a fantastic set of skills and the ability to operate in teams and under pressure. But also, I think it's a good filter for values in many cases. And so you'll often find that veterans make excellent team members. So yeah, please do hire, invest in, back veterans, entrepreneurs and employees. I left the Marines after 5 years and made my way to London and got a job as an investment banker with JP Morgan. And I spent a little time with them, but this was while the dot-com bubble was bursting. And having spent my time as a Marine using relatively old technology, I found myself fascinated by this new technology and keen to plunge in. So I left JP Morgan and set up a business, which would actually now be called a fintech, although this was the year 2001, so the term wasn't very common back then. And together with my co-founder, I spent... Say again?
Before it was cool.
Well, I don't know about that. We certainly enjoyed ourselves.
You made it cool.
Well, we spent 9 years building that business, which would now also be called a crowdfunding business. So we integrated a payment system and we explored network dynamics. We understood how people influenced each other to commit to making payments online. And so we were relatively early into payments, but we were particularly early, I think, into analyzing the data associated with those payments. And certainly for much of the noughties, I was hawking the value of data-driven insights. I found that really quite a hard sell. People on the whole, certainly among our client set, were more interested simply in moving the money, which I understand is important, but I think there's a huge amount of value in the insights we were able to glean from the data as well. We sold that business in 2010, and I then I got involved in a couple of other startups which didn't really go anywhere, one in renewable energy and one in e-commerce, which was a fascinating opportunity to move beyond payments into the logistics and indeed the sort of international sourcing of product as well. I was slightly thrown off track there by having a large fist-sized brain tumor just here in 2011. and I was very fortunate. I had a very sudden diagnosis and a very complete recovery. So I'm very much one of the lucky ones.
Yeah.
I was shortly after that approached by UK Trade and Investment, which is now the Department for International Trade, who were looking for someone who had a bit of startup experience and some financial services experience to help introduce overseas investors to UK companies. So I became the Chief Operating Officer of their venture capital unit, and in due course, their innovation gateway.
Wow.
And while I was there, I was looking at ways in which technology could dramatically increase the capacity of government.
Yeah.
So I left in 2015 with a technology which I built, calling in favors from various CTOs to effectively offer back into government from the outside. And while I was preparing for that, I was approached by Canary Wharf Group. And so Level 39 wasn't my plan, but of course, when I was tapped on the shoulder, I thought, well, this is a fantastic organization which has huge potential. So I was delighted to go along.
What was it that really sort of caught your attention there? Because it's that sort of last decade has been an unusual sort of journey, hasn't it? From being going through the startup thing. I think it's great that you've got a story there of great success, and then also of more hardship around what didn't go the way it was, and then taking that over. We've seen the darling of probably the UK economy has been the work we've done with export and the growth of the sector, and then being thrown into the incubation of Level 39 and seeing so many great British companies sort of really thrive and grow from that stable. What was it that sort of really caught your attention and said, do you know what, I can shift the needle here, I can add value here?
Well, it's a great question. And I think one of the things that often people who are interested in innovation do is they explore what are the necessary ingredients for that. You've mentioned international trade as one of the factors. And there's plenty of research on this, but not a great deal of consensus. Where there is consensus, it typically seems to focus very much on the role of clustering. And some people say, if you want brilliant businesses, what you need is a room full of very clever people, Nobel Prize winners and billionaires. And I'd like to suggest that if you were to borrow a figure from Microsoft, if you're in Level 39, you're within 5 minutes walk of 30% of the world's financial services IT budgets. And the reason that's important is that, of course, while investors' views are important, the really important views, if you want to grow, are those of customers. And so it's very hard to find anywhere on the surface of the earth a greater density of sophisticated customers for technology than you find in London. And so while, of course, Level 39 is a story of fantastic British tech growth, it's actually home to people from 50 different countries. So it's an incredible privilege to be part of this massive global gathering of talent to address some of the world's most meaningful problems. But the reason, to answer your question, that I was really drawn by it was the dynamics of that ecosystem. It's the extent to which you get what's sometimes called network closure in an environment like that. The extent to which you're able to quite systematically reduce the time it takes to close sales, the time it takes to raise money, and the cost of finding, recruiting, and retaining top talent. All of those shorten in an ecosystem like Level 39 in relatively predictable ways. And of course, every one of those increases the prospects, the odds of success for a given company.
And there's numerous different versions of it now. The banks have been very, I was going to say the word aggressive then, but I don't think it's the right word, but very proactive in seizing this opportunity. And once, when it was fintech versus the big banks, it's actually been fintech boosted by the big banks. It seems to be one of the key things. And I think, you can look at Rise, you can look at Citi have been, particularly proactive in there. You look at a number of the consultancies who've set up their sort of ecosystems as well. Tell me why you think the ecosystem piece has become such an important part of the fintech movement and on a wider scale, the tech movement.
Well, I think one of the things that for me was a very simple rule of thumb, something which was a useful predictive indicator that a company was on the right path for success, was when I noticed them coming up in third-party conversations. In other words, being discussed when they weren't actually present. Because of course, it's those conversations that are most plausible. They're the ones where there isn't somebody who's trying to spin something. There isn't a pitch at work. There is simply a qualified, as in an expert, or at least an informed perspective being shared. And this is, I mentioned network closure. This is something which happens in dense clusters, especially what academics like Urco Audio at Imperial call innovation ecosystems, those that are drawing talent from many different disciplines to address a bounded set of client problems. And you find that, of course, in financial services clusters. So you find people coming from every discipline, every country, to address a relatively bounded set of problems, which means that many people have relevant perspectives to share about what others are doing. And what that actually does is it means that trust is manufactured, created faster, because you find you can hear about a third party from someone else who has an expert but neutral perspective. That's why sales cycles shorten. That's why investors find an environment like this easier to conduct due diligence in. It is that, if you like, third party perspective, network closure, which is absolutely central to the success of these sorts of clusters.
Yeah, I think it's so fascinating. It's been such a good thing to see over the last, what would it be, probably 10 years or so. We've seen the sort of real rise and rise of this sort of environment, and the results do speak for themselves, as you see. So coming back to you've been in that environment for the last 4 years. That's recently ended for you, and you come into this interesting position where you can do an awful lot. Your background is opens so many doors, which in some ways is a great thing. In other ways, I'm sure is a challenge, because it's like, right, which door do I open through that? We've spoken a little bit about this, about what you can do next and where you want to go and where your heart lies. And I think it becomes interesting because it's about the right opportunity for you now. You could go, continue down and add value from everything you've gleaned over the last, 4 years at level 39 the UKTR, before that, etc., etc. What's going to grab your attention, and what are the options for us? Talk about some of the things where you feel you can really add value right now.
Well, thank you, Toby. I guess one of the things that has been on my mind really for about 3 years is that these clusters, these ecosystems that level 39 is a prominent example of, are fantastic, but they're also quite limited. They often, of course, are very geographically constrained. And it was already becoming clear even before the pandemic that there were good reasons, and of course the political movement to level up the economy was an expression of this. Good reasons to try and spread the love a bit, try to make sure that these systems were more open. And certainly that was something which I had been seeking ways to do for several years at level 39. All of that, of course, has been accelerated dramatically by COVID, by the fact that it is no longer possible to bring high density clusters of people together and create that kind of serendipity which people so often celebrate around the water cooler or around a slice of cake, which was a favored technology in level 39. But I guess
sweet jars, I seem to remember as well.
Absolutely. But of course, that is by no means the only way to achieve this. And in fact, it was already becoming clear there are much more powerful levers to pull. And that's what really excites me most. I think that the organizations that have got the best prospects of success through and beyond COVID are not those who can achieve that tight embrace around a group of startups, but those who can understand how to draw organizations and individuals to them, not by saying, here is our interface, here is effectively our API, here's how you plug into us, so much as here's why you might want to. So I think it is really the art and science of expressing purpose as a driver of ecosystem. That is the key challenge for most organizations. And it is that challenge that I am passionate about addressing. So for example, talking to a blue chip company recently, one of the things that was very clear is that they want to work with lots of small businesses. They recognize this very fragmented landscape of small businesses as a source of precisely the innovation they need to be able to satisfy their customers. But candidly, they will admit, and I won't tell you who they are to spare their blushes, but they will admit that they're not a particularly attractive prospect. And rather than, if you like, completely reinventing themselves, this is essentially a signaling challenge. It's a challenge for them, not so much to say, take us as we are, so much as take us for what we aim to be together.
Yeah.
In other words, defining a common purpose and set of values for an ecosystem is a function which relatively few large organizations have really engaged with. There's a huge opportunity there. And that's certainly what we found at level 39. It was not so much saying, come and enjoy the view, that really drew people together. The view is fantastic and the cake is fantastic. So these are contributory factors. But by far the most important, the most powerful one is when you can find something which people want to be a part of together, because it increases the probability of every single conversation leading to grounds for collaboration.
Yeah.
So this is not so much about getting to yes in a binary negotiation. It's about creating conditions where you don't get to know, as in NO, but you do get to know, as in have knowledge of each other.
Yeah.
Not necessarily about a narrow product or service, but about a collective purpose. And of course, the organizations which are best at expressing that become attractive not only to innovators, but to big clients as well. So essentially, there is a huge ecosystem opportunity in a post-COVID environment and a during COVID environment, which large organizations can now capture. And that's what I want to be a part of.
So when you talk about these large organizations, as you say, there are companies there who are attractive and know they're attractive, and those who aren't necessarily as attractive for that. Those who aren't are looking to transform themselves into someone who can compete in that sort of thing, because the benefits are obvious for so many reasons. Tell us the sort of businesses who should be reaching out to you, and the sort of companies who you can help within that as well.
Well, I think the first thing is these need to be organizations who acknowledge that there's more capability outside their walls than inside them. And find me a single organization in the world of which that is not true, and I'll be very impressed.
Mm-hmm.
We all have to recognize that no matter how brilliant our firm is, it can benefit hugely by a well-designed engagement with the ecosystem around it. So it needs, in other words, to have an open mindset. But secondly, it also needs to be aware of some of the threats, because right now, I think many of us feel assailed by the challenges of COVID. People have all sorts of burdens on their mind. Organizations are concerned about managing cash flow, thinking ahead to when they might be ready to make kind of commitments they are cautious about making now. Mm. And of course, many people are wrestling with a much more immediate and personal set of challenges themselves, their families, their loved ones, facing a really uncertain future. So now is a really difficult time for organizations large and small. And for those who have the ability, through a combination of natural disposition and probably good fortune and luck, to be able to be progressive, proactive, generous even, there's huge opportunity. But it does require courage and resources. So it needs to be an organization which has the means to take a slightly longer view. Now, I would suggest that that's particularly important for technology firms, because right now, of course, we're all celebrating the roles of technology firms in bringing us the ability to connect with each other. But if you cast your mind back a year, even the great technology titans who we're now celebrating because they're making it possible for us to get together like this, were beginning to be challenged for the fact that they were embedding bias, they were increasing inequality, they were in some cases not paying very much tax in certain jurisdictions, that they were leading to brain drain. The charge sheet against tech firms was growing. And that's temporarily suspended, but it's temporary. People have begun, I think, to notice just how well many of the tech firms have been doing in the markets during these last few months. And so I think any firm which is complacent about its reputation should be very, very alert to this. We will at some point be looking back, as people did after the Second World War, for example, and saying, did you as an organization have a good war? Did you conduct yourselves in ways which will be seen as having been socially responsible, environmentally responsible, aligned with common purpose? It's important to be taking steps to make sure that's the case right now. This is not something to leave until later.
Do you know what? I absolutely love that. I find that was a very inspiring sort of message to be given there, and I completely agree with you. I think that sort of, we've been speaking on this show. The whole premise of starting this show was to create some positivity among a constant flow of negative news that you could only turn on BBC every single minute to be hearing. And I just love the uplifting elements that we're talking about with all of that. And there is great opportunity, and what you were talking about there, I think, moves the needle further forward to say, look, this is, tech is a very interesting space, as you say, because at certain stages it's been seen as the sort of the bully boy, and we've all heard the sort of stories of the big tech giants and tax and such like. But I think actually, if you look at how important it's proven to be over the course of this pandemic, how important it's been, that we're able to to exist. If we'd had everything that happened 15 years ago, with today's without today's technology, I don't know where most businesses would be during that sort of basis, and it's due to technology and its innovation that's allowed that. And so for companies to be able to work together with that and see this collaboration, see this huge force for good, and look at that word purpose in particular, which I think has been so, over the last 5-10 years, become more and more ingrained, ever more ingrained in terms of what great businesses look like, and how important it is to technologists to be involved in that. I think it's fascinating. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Coming back to you again there, you talk about the sort of, and you can clearly identify your passion for that world. There's also this other piece that you can do that works alongside that. I know you've got equal passion for that as well with your background. So a man who's been involved in a successful exit of a startup and growth and scale project, seen some of the other sides of it, but particularly over the last decade, having seen so many other companies and learned from their successes, success leaves clues, and learned from some of their failures, I think would think alongside that as well. All of this gives you a unique set of skills that can probably come into a business and sort of aid a scale up or aid a startup and be that sort of figurehead for it that can navigate and probably accelerate growth as well. Tell us a little bit about that door and how that opens for you and what that looks like.
Well, you're right, of course. I've spent the last few years, both at Level 39 and at UK Trade and Investment, really studying the organizational characteristics which lead to success for Series A to B to C, particularly fintech and cybersecurity companies. And I guess I've really dived deep in cyber, especially. I focused on that very much when I was with Level 39, with UKTI. But in Level 39, the fastest growing cluster of cyber companies in London, of course, it's impossible to resist the conclusion that cybersecurity is the bedrock on which all fintech is built. You don't even get through the door of a bank to discuss a fintech innovation unless it's demonstrably secure.
Yeah.
So cybersecurity has been one of the great sort of undersung success stories of fintech. It's absolutely essential to it. So I've particularly focused on fintech and cybersecurity, and of that, particularly B2B rather than B2C. And as I said, I think having observed so many of the environmental conditions which support success, and having myself built and sold a fintech business, although that was a little while ago now, I'm very conscious of the fact that the challenges of growth, especially under such uncertain circumstances, require a special blend of qualities and qualifications, really. And I'd like to think that certainly the time I have spent really conducting a kind of comparative analysis means that I'm well placed to help organizations through that challenging growth stage. Now, of course, those comparative analyses are really hard to boil down into, here's the formula. Let me tell you in 3 bullet points what I've learned from all of this. It requires a much more sensitive sense of context. And I think, although summarizing a journey like this is challenging, I would summarize my own experience as saying that certainly 15 years ago, I thought it was all down to the hard skills of quantitative analysis and winning the argument on the spreadsheet. Certainly my first business was on a spreadsheet, I thought, very elegant. It was complete. But actually most of our success came about when we began to develop emotional intelligence. And certainly for me, that's a set of lessons which I continue to learn. And during my time at Level 39, again and again, I saw that the ability not so much to be technically correct in every detail, but to understand the cultural challenges in particular among clients, the cultural challenges among investors and collaborators, especially channel partners, as well as among your own team, were key. And that is certainly an area where I've spent a great deal of time. And I think that, although, as I said, every organization is different, all organizations require emotionally intelligent leadership, especially, perhaps a little more surprisingly, if they're in B2B. Some people think that B2B is a very clinical environment. Emphatically, I think it requires a deep emotional understanding.
Without question, I think that's really. I was having this conversation yesterday. I was on the other side of the camera yesterday on a panel speaking about my industry, the recruitment industry. And a question came in on the sidebar about hard and soft skills and which were more important. And without without hesitation, for me, it's the the soft skills in any business that are particularly prevalent. And I think it's really interesting you go down that route with it, and something I could spend hours talking to you about, which may be another conversation, but we'll talk about that from there. With regards to that, and you've seen, particularly that cyber world, I think there's some really interesting stuff that's come out of level 39 in particular, and you probably see, am I right in saying that the darlings of the cyber movement in level 39 would probably be digital shadows, right?
I think probably they're the biggest, best known name, yes, but they are, if you like, the flagship of a flotilla of other interesting cyber companies. So don't stop there. Get to know the whole community.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that as well. The flagship of a flotilla, I'm definitely going to be using in the future. So you've seen those businesses, you've seen what's made them tick and succeed. The soft skills is very interesting. But if you were to say that one or two key learns that you'd have that the fundamental drivers to the most successful businesses at the level, because there's obviously been successes and a few that haven't made it out of level 39. It's not always been it's not a guarantee to the big leagues, is it? But it's been a very, very strong pointer in the right direction. Tell us some of the key attributes that you've seen that have really driven businesses to succeed over others.
Well, you mentioned digital shadows, and I think that's a very good place to start in answering that question. So if you, I first came across digital shadows, in fact, way before I joined level 39, and was incredibly struck by the fact that both of the founders, Alistair Patterson and James Chappell, are strikingly generous in the way they behave. And I mean that really when what I first noticed was the extent to which they would acknowledge the ability of other organizations, not digital shadows, other organizations and people they'd met. In other words, they were doing a fantastic job of supporting the ecosystem around them. And it appeared to be a kind of unlimited generosity. I was very struck by that then, and I've remained very struck by it. And when I describe digital shadows as like the flagship of a flotilla, the reason why so many others choose to sail with them is because of this. And I mentioned earlier this effect of network closure. If digital shadows tell you that here is an organization that they rate, well, that's a huge trust construction exercise, because they are helping you as a potential client or employee or investor to form a more informed view of an organization that may be difficult to understand. Often cybersecurity sales, for example, are among the most complex. So to have that independent, credible third-party perspective is really valuable. It's a trust construction exercise. And that signaling takes place, to stretch the metaphor a bit, right around that fleet. And of course, what that means is that here is effectively a fleet, a pack of organizations who are competing with each other in some respects, but in a way which builds confidence in the entire community, in the entire group. So it's a sort of self-policing. If you were going to buy a second-hand car and you are not an expert mechanic, one of the best approaches to take is to go to a place where there are several second-hand car dealers physically close to each other, because then you can effectively invite them to self-police. And in cybersecurity, where there is the same sort of asymmetry of knowledge between the customer and the supplier, it's really helpful if you can compare and contrast. And so I would suggest that the best behavior for whether you're James and Alistair at Digital Shadows, or indeed any other entrepreneur in an environment like that, is that generosity, that willingness to be compared and contrasted and to offer independent perspectives. That, to me, was perhaps the most important characteristic that was a good predictive indicator of success among the companies I got to know. It's
fascinating, isn't it? I think that's a sort of generosity economy is a really interesting part of it. There's more and more research that's being done about it. It's popping up in more and more books of late. And I've had the fortune to meet James Chappell a couple of times, and I've spoken on a panel with him at an event by London Loves Business many years ago, and I know exactly, as soon as you were talking about that, I know exactly what you're saying, because the sort of insight and the value that was added was clear right from, very, very open, very happy to chat, and very, very useful in the experience of, and humble as well by the same sort of rationale. So very, very interesting. Thanks for sharing that. So you're sat there in this very interesting position where there's lessons and experience and value that can add real value on one side, and then we've got this other opportunity on the others where we can catapult large-scale businesses to really form an ecosystem that can learn from everything that we're seeing and maximise and turn the negative of COVID into a huge positive as well by the same rationale. So I think it's to me it sits as an extremely exciting time, and it makes you a very, very exciting prospect for to be out in the marketplace at the moment. For people who are watching this and sort of keen to get in touch and find out, and I'm sure there's going to be little gems hit throughout all of this that will appeal to different people. I know you're keen and always happy to speak to people, Ben, as well. What's the best way of reaching out and doing that?
Well, I guess I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. I'm Ben Brabyn, which is Brabyn. I'm on Twitter as @BenBrabyn, or one word. And I'm more than happy, as you say, to have a conversation. I'm conscious of the fact that while this is a really difficult time for many, it's also a time of great opportunity. If you can be agile, if you can adapt, and if you have the confidence and the patience, perhaps. So I'm particularly keen to have conversations with organizations that don't want to miss the opportunity to adapt through this challenge.
Yeah, I think that's that. And I've been speaking to companies, as you know, on this show now for throughout this period, and I think the overwhelming commonality from my perspective of businesses there who've been and performed well, and there are companies there who've sort of doubled and trebled over this period, which is amazing, and I love to see it. And I don't think any of them should be embarrassed about saying that. I think it's a real sign of great leadership, great values, great companies to sort of see that and take that. And they should be very, very proud of themselves for doing that at the same time. But they've taken that attitude to say, look, here's an opportunity, and how can we add more value? And they've given a hell of a lot more, as you talk about beforehand, to their networks, their environments, and it's been really inspiring to see. And I've said it a few times that this for me has been like this whole journey of speaking to people through the show has been like from a personal, selfish reason, it's been like an MBA, and I feel like I feel both inspired and like I've learned loads from speaking to you, Ben. So I really, really appreciate your time on that today. I'm going to finish with one last question just before we sign off, because you mentioned it beforehand, and it is my passion, and it is my great love. You spoke about talent and the level 39, about how it's sort of been able to sort of share that talent and how important it is. I'm sure you appreciate as much as anyone that does the importance and significance of having great talent to scale great businesses. Tell us about some of the things you've learned and seen about scale, and where talent comes into it, and some of the lessons that you can share on that as well.
Well, I think one of the best things that anybody ever said to me when I was at level 39 was just before Christmas 2017, I think it was. One of the entrepreneurs I admire most in that community came up and said, "Ben, I can't thank you and the team enough. I can hire people here I couldn't hire before." And he'd moved his company as a small team, less than 10 people, earlier that year. And the team had scaled dramatically and was approaching 50 by year end. So really rapid growth. And I unpacked this a little bit. I was curious to test this out. And of course, it's very, very difficult to for anyone considering joining a scaling team to evaluate the career risk of what they do. It's a really hard call to make. And one of the consequences of that, one of the slightly less obviously collective effects of that, is that only people who are relatively secure can afford to take the risk of working for risky companies. And that's one of the reasons why early stage tech companies are often struggling with diversity. You often have to have quite an advantaged background to be able to take the risk. Now, of course, you also need to be super skilled and dynamic and driven, but it is one of the contributory factors. And so I think it's worth considering, how do we de-risk collectively? How do we de-risk the decision to join a scaling company? And one of the least bad or best answers to that is, well, we take a kind of portfolio approach. So rather than saying, I'm going to put all my eggs in that particular basket, I'm going to join that company, and either we will become a unicorn and everything, all of the dreams will come true, or it'll be a catastrophe, and I'll be back to square one and trying to figure out, licking my wounds, trying to figure out what next in a year's time. Of course, if you are part not just of one organization, but of a movement or a cluster, or a movement and a cluster, then you've got a much better chance. Then you've got not just, if you like, one basket to place your career eggs in, but many. So it seems to me sense that if you're an employee, you don't just say, well, I want to join that company because I think it's got great prospects, so much as I want to join companies that have certain characteristics, certain values, or indeed that are in a certain cluster. So often people will shape their career around a university cluster, for example. And I would suggest that as it becomes harder physically to convene, the best approach for us all to take is not only to buy on the basis of values and purpose, not only to create ecosystems on that basis, but to seek to commit our career accordingly as well. So it's far, far more fulfilling to believe passionately in a business which maybe doesn't succeed, but which is part of a broader movement, because that actually provides you with your next steps as well. So plan your career, in other words, not on the basis of, do I like this particular technology or this particular product or service, so much as, do I like the problem, the big humanity scale problem that this sets out to solve? Because if I do, if it works out with this one company, great. But if it doesn't, I'm still in the right part of the economy. I'm still among the right ecosystem of organizations. I will succeed in the long term, if not the short term.
Do you know what? If I wasn't on Zoom at home and wearing shorts, I'd stand up and applaud at the moment. At the moment, Ben, giving away my secrets here of the newsreader. But I completely agree with you. I think that's that's utterly brilliant advice that you've shared there, and I've thoroughly enjoyed all of this conversation. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing so generously. And look, to my network, who may well be watching here. I would love to introduce anyone to Ben. It's very, very, very clear to me about the sort of the massive scale value that you can add to an organisation. And I'm really going to be fascinated to see what comes next for you, and I'm very, very excited to to hear about it, watch it, and see it continue to go. I said it was going to be the last, but actually there is one more thing I want to talk to you about, and we've done that on by talking about purpose and such like a lot, which brings me to Genie Shares, which I nearly forgot, which would have been terrible of me to do that as well. So let's round up by talking about something which I know you're very passionate about as well, and you're doing at the moment, and is adding real value. Tell us about the whole concept behind Genie Shares.
Well, thank you, Toby. So Genie Shares really began as a side project for me when I was at level 39. And it began because I was conscious that we had this incredible gusher of value, a fantastic concentration of brilliant people from all around the world creating incredible businesses, but that actually it was really hard to explain to normal people. There we were in this tower of glass and steel in East London, pretty much out of reach for most people, creating things that were pretty abstract. So there was nothing you could show people, no shiny piece of technology to celebrate, nothing which clearly and demonstrably improved the lives of sort of normal people. Now, actually, there was a lot of improvement going on, but it wasn't attributable to companies in level 39. So I thought, we've got to find ways of making this more relatable. At a time when, I mentioned leveling up, when politically the prevailing winds have moved dramatically over the last few years, from support of anything that looks like tech innovation to support of anything that looks like it supports the interests of the majority of the population in terms of healthcare, in terms of employment, in sustainable, dignified jobs, in terms of redistribution of wealth and opportunity outside of London and metropolitan areas. We didn't have any tools in our toolkit. Genie Shares is an attempt to respond to that. And it's also really almost a purpose in a box for entrepreneurs. So it's a way for entrepreneurs, regardless of their technology, regardless of their market, to do something which addresses not just the head, but the heart, and therefore can reach many more people. It's very simple. Individual entrepreneurs pledge 1% of their equity of their business, but they give it away to an individual. And there's something a bit theatrical, a little bit Willy Wonka about this. It's not about economic redistribution. This isn't an attempt to replace taxes, for example. It's absolutely about making a connection of the heart between business and community. And rather than giving that value into a fund which is managed by a remote and distant elite, this is very personal. It's about finding somebody who is almost a lucky representative of all of us and saying, I am sharing some of my ownership with you. I want to do this to invite you on our journey. I don't know if we'll be massively successful. But I do know I want to be representative of and accountable to the community of which I'm a part. And so many entrepreneurs have stepped forward over these last few months, and you can find out more and see their little introductory stories, 1-minute videos they've shot at genieshares.com, which, by the way, is another way to get in touch with me. And you'll find there are people who are pledging their equity to key workers, to volunteers, to carers, demonstrating that every business needs, of course, good luck, great hard work, but it needs a supportive community behind it. And at a time when public trust is perhaps at its lowest level in our lifetimes, here is an incredibly compelling, charismatic group of entrepreneurs who, even while they wrestle with the challenges they face, are generous enough and confident enough to share some of the upside of what they do. So I am doing that as a side project, but actually it's a passion which I think is totally aligned with what I described. It's a way in which individual entrepreneurs can express their purpose and reach out to people who perhaps have never owned equity in anything. We created a 5-minute pilot film in which an entrepreneur called Peter Kelly gave away £30,000 worth of equity in his company Employable last year. And the company has gone from strength to strength. Customers reacted incredibly favorably. His sales rocketed. Employees were really proud to be part of an organization that was so vested in its community. And investors, well, they certainly pumped his valuation up. As he put it, that was one of the best decisions he's ever made in strictly commercial terms. And the person he gave the equity to, Jodie, her life is transformed. You can see it if you go to genieshares.com, a short 5-minute film in which 2 lives are transformed. And now we have millions of pounds worth of equity pledged. And so we're also looking for a corporate sponsor so that we can make a series of films telling the stories of those diverse, charismatic entrepreneurs as they bring a sparkle of magic into people's lives during what may well be quite a dark winter for many of us.
That's amazing. And if you can send me that clip, I'll tag it in the comments when we release it as well, and make sure everyone can see that. But yeah, again, it's a sort of round of applause moment on that, and it certainly sounds extremely exciting to what you're doing. Ben, it has been an absolute pleasure. We've spent far longer than I anticipated on taking of your time, but I think worth every single second of it, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. What a great way to start a Friday morning for me, and I'm looking forward to releasing this out to everyone very soon as well. I wish you the very, but nothing other than the very best of luck with the search, and I'm sure that anyone seeing this will say exactly the same thing, that we'll look forward to seeing you out in the market again very soon. Ben, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Toby.
And thank you all for watching. Please do get in touch with Ben, and happy to introduce myself as well. And we'll see you soon on another episode of Fintech Focus TV. Thanks a lot.